Hi everyone, it's July 19th, 2022 at about 2:30 my time. And I thought I'd drop this truth bomb riff today off the heels of several conversations I've had and a personal experience that I had over the course of the last, I don't know, few days or so. And, it kind of has this sort of, I don't know, this element of truth to it that seemingly puts my mind at rest, but it also kind of elevates what it is that we need to connect on, and hopefully everybody else will connect on, and why it all matters. So I think all of us are aware of just every other day there's some sort of chaos, some sort of craziness that seems to be like yet another example of how far into disarray our country is falling. Every night that we have these January 6th hearings and all of the revelations of what Trump knew and how he knew it and what he did and why he did it, is bombastic and ridiculous as it all is. It's less crazy than the Department of Justice having not already fracked him for what we already know. The degree in which our legal system, especially with political ramifications, moves is just ungodly. I mean, we know that lies and deception and all sorts of tricks can travel around the world with lightning speed because of technology, and yet investigations and revelations and truths and the mix of all of these things move so freaking slow, especially if those at the top of the institutions like the Department of Justice, Merrick Garland, are like literally creating such barriers to not literally deal with the evidence at stake because he's afraid that literally there's 70 plus million people that support Trump and want to be very careful not to be seen as kind of a political witch hunt. Now, there's some truth to that, of course, but the evidence on Trump is ridiculous. But again, as I've told you over and over and over, in comparison to what we have revealed on our financial system, it's a drop in the bucket. And in fact, the fact that we didn't prosecute the CEOs on Wall Street as a result of what we show on the con at www.thecon.tv is what created this hell that we're in. And I posed this question earlier to some people, particularly on Twitter, and I found it interesting that I had some personal responses, but not so many publicly. And so, for example, to all of you who actually believe in the importance, let's say the profound importance, let's say the actual at the height of everything that we are and what we're supposed to do. If the law doesn't have integrity and accountability, how does the United States function? Well, it doesn't. It's not the United States if the law doesn't have absolute integrity, which of course it doesn't. We've descended into this corrupt madness. And if you look back at history, corruption is what ends all empire. And that's been an ongoing theme that I've been bringing to you over the course of the last several of these truth bombs. But further to that, corruption in modern times, in the modern era, going back to World War II and what created World War II. There's been all sorts of like different chapters in America or world history, global history of certain fiefdoms and fights and wars based on hatred to a degree, but it was always kind of in the mix of monarchies or maybe the church and that sort of thing, which has slightly different bent than what fascism became. And fascism that starts under Mussolini in Italy and then transcends to Germany's Hitler's Nazi Germany and everything that created. It was and I cannot underestimate how important it is for you to hear this. It was the failure of capitalism through what turned out to be fraud that created the Great Depression, that blew up the global economy in 1929, that made Hitler become what he became. I mean, Hitler was already there, but it wasn't that the populace didn't accept Hitler until all of the institutions failed and shit hit the fan and there was stagflation in Germany. A lot of people call it hyperinflation because of what happened in Weimar Republic based on, Treaty of Versailles and everything else. But this isn't meant to be a lecture on World War II so much it is to draw parallels to things that are happening now. And so at that time period when shit hit the fan and Germany was dissolving into just this debt patronage that was beyond serviceable, that led to this hyperinflation that was based on stagflation, that created the fertile soil for Hitler to rise to power. Now, Hitler was already in the mix, and then he got knocked down a few steps, and then he had some problems, and then he had disarray, and he had all sorts of problems. But it wasn't until the Great Depression that really brought it all together because of a collective misery in Germany that propelled Hitler to become who he became as Chancellor of Germany, and of course the Fuhrer, and the devastation and the absolute insane, tragic cost and the horrific cost of World War II. Certainly a lesson for anyone in all ages, but particularly now, and relevant to these things that I'm talking about in terms of if the Department of Justice doesn't rein in Trump, and I posed this question earlier on Twitter, and it's interesting, the feedback that I'm getting. What are you going to do if extremist groups that might be white supremacists and fascists come to power because Trump's running for president? If the DOJ doesn't do its job. And so a lot of people, silently are coming to me and going, oh my God, that can't happen. We can't let that happen, or it's not going to happen, or some variation therein. Meanwhile, you've got the evidence in World War II that that's exactly how this stuff happens, especially if we have another tripwire effect in the broader economy and we go to a massive recession and maybe another depression, which seems inevitable to me at this point. So that's one side of the house, right? Now, the other side of the house, and I brought this actually up to Alex Gibney. I tweeted at Alex Gibney. It's a no-brainer that corruption fuels fascism. That's all there is to it. So if you don't have the integrity of law to take down bad guys that are actually guilty of breaking the law, then you don't have any credibility. And that's what's happened to the United States, or Department of Justice, and the Federal Bureau of Investigations, and the Securities and Exchange Commission, because of what they didn't do in 2008, which we prove over and over and over in the con, and what I'm dropping to you on the truth bombs, in which we're finding thank God, a small audience, but it's still a small audience compared to the victims that exist out there. There was literally 16 million filed closures in 2012, which equates to about 48 million people, 50 million people. I think it's much more than that. And 99% of them don't have a clue of what actually took place. They don't have a clue that they were set up in a massive rigged Ponzi scheme to set up to have their property stolen from them. And then there was collateral damage all the way around. And our courts allowed it. And what I've posed over and over and over in places directly to them, power players in media that have platforms that reach millions of people, that look, we've got evidence of what has happened in the judiciary. We know that courts have allowed fraud to destroy, I don't want to put a number on it because it could be beyond our wildest imagination. But I have evidence of up to like 70,000 pieces of documentation fraud that were used in, court cases to illegally foreclose on people. And the judges knowingly did this. How do I know they knowingly did this? Well, if you were doing it over and over and over and you didn't allow discovery because you were allowing privilege, because you knew something was up, but you were being incentivized to basically get these cases, these dockets off your desk, and you got actually promoted as a result of that, and you get further entrenched in the the position. That's how it worked. And there's more details than that, but that's one side of the equation. And so, it's a downward spiral to absolute calamity. It's just history. It's what happens over and over and over in history. And yet it's the emperor's new clothes on really bad acid, as I've said before, because we have the evidence, we have the facts, we have all the credibility, because we went to the FBI, the DOJ, the SEC, we went to AGs, we found the only RICO conviction in the country that proves it all, and yet media has sat on this. And so there's great filmmakers out there who tell certain versions of the truth that are big and everything else, but they don't tell this truth. This truth is the only truth. This is the most important, overwhelming truth of our era, okay? Because it led to 29 trillion in 2009, another 18 to 19 trillion in 2019, I think 10 trillion plus cents, and there's other perimeters that lead me to believe that we're north of $50 trillion that went to this fraud syndicate, backstopped by the full faith and credit of the United States, that are courts enabled to bury millions of people. Okay, put that in context to what World War II to what happened in World War II, and ultimately what's going on now. with the insurrection and the white supremacist groups. And it was obviously the evidence that we've seen. They're white supremacist groups that wanted a frickin' coup d'etat. And they had people in the military that backed it. I mean, it's big time shit. And it would be beyond comprehension big if it wasn't for what I'm telling you that allowed all this madness to happen. And so the continuity of the whole thing is like, look, you can't be Rob Reiner, meathead, Mr. whatever his name was, in one of my favorite mockumentaries of all time. What was it that? Anyway, I'll come back to it. I can't think of the wonder. Spinal Tap. Rob Reiner's a great actor, and he was great in All in the Family and everything else. But on Twitter, he's nonstop, all over Trump is the end all be all, and it has to be Merrick Garland, the Department of Justice. I mean, everybody sees the evidence. Okay, now everybody knows what he did was what they're saying it is. It was to create fraud upon the United States. And I know there's many of you where they're like, oh, wait a second, what about the big lie? He got set up and this and that. No, he didn't get set up. He used it. He lied, denied, switched the blame, and implicated, used documentation, fabrication, all sorts of in the election certification, which he learned from what took place in the con. It wasn't he lived the con. He was the con. He's donned the con. He's one small ingredient of the whole thing, right? And so, he's a big ingredient because he became president and everything that could lead to. But we could literally have a civil war where half the population is moving in this direction, and the other half knows this is happening, but they didn't rise up when they had the chance to basically demand that the United States act as the United States and its institutions actually uphold the law and hold the bad guys to account, which in this particular case are the guys that led to $50 trillion being maneuvered and created into existence and basically backstopped to backstop this frickin' fraud pipeline. And there's many different versions of what took place since 2008, but 2008 was the big one, and that created this madness. And by the way, the housing market is completely up to its eyeballs in this stuff since 2020 because of what we did with zero interest and quantitative easing. So again, it's quantitative easing that the Federal Reserve bought fraudulently created loans and securities and everything else across the board for 100 cents on the dollar that backstopped all these bets for these fucking criminal institutions that use the con and everything we show you in the con to create this incredible fraud pipeline that took over the courts, that took over all of our government. It took over not just the judiciary but Congress and also the presidency. It's a hijacking of monumental proportion, and it's all based on this corruption that our central bank fuels. Surprise! And so why did I want to bring this to you again? Because I've said it over and over and over, and I've talked to huge people in media that don't want to wrap their heads around this. I'll say it again. David Sirota has ignored the information that I put on his plate of the evidence of people getting railroaded in the courts based on judicial corruption that he refuses to endeavor. And he talks about different versions of it, but he doesn't talk about this. For a lot of reasons, I can only speculate. But that's one side of the house. The other side of the house is I'm talking to this executive producer friend of mine who does big time shit. I mean, this guy's worked with some of the biggest acts in rock and roll. He's been in the business forever. He's a great guy. They were the executive producers of our show, meaning that they were our distributors. Sorry, they weren't the executive producers of our show. They were the distributors of our show. And they've done stuff with Pearl Jam and some of my favorite bands of all time, Pearl Jam and the Grateful Dead, and of course Green Day are three of the ones that come to top to mind. They also did Neil Young and many others, but they've done a lot of movies and this and that and everything else. And this guy who's the executive producer of their company is very close with the top woman at Netflix. And so I called him up and I said, hey, look, man, Netflix is definitely in the grinder right now because of everything that's going on with Netflix's stock. They're stopped purchasing, they're losing viewers, they're tanking after 25 years of amazing growth that took over the industry and that sort of thing. And it's completely connected to what we show you in the con, because the first thing out of his mouth, and I knew this before, but I'll say it to you for your ears, that they were chasing it from the very beginning. They were like 135% debt ratio to equity value from the get-go. So they were debt financing nonstop. That's how this whole thing works. Wall Street goes public. You finance, whatever the product is. In this case, it's films. And, of course, we went to them, a year and a half ago to try to lay out the largest criminal conspiracy and cover up in history that affected hundreds of millions of people, and they didn't buy it. Well, you find out later that none other than BlackRock is on the board of directors. They're dependent on the fuel of the debt servicing and everything else. So they're like, that's not a story that we want to tell. Now, did they tell us that? Of course not. But it's inferences and other things that happen. Doesn't matter. They didn't want to see it. But we know after thousands and thousands of people have told us, maybe tens of thousands, quite frankly, we have been seen over several million times. But everybody who watches the content, they're like, oh my God, are you fucking kidding me? Why isn't this seen everywhere? Why isn't this on Netflix? Why isn't this on HBO? Well, it's not, because we expose the people they get their money on to fuel their business. And so it's disingenuous. They're going to give us great product. Trust me, there's a lot of great product on Netflix. I love frickin' Stranger Things. Absolutely love Stranger Things. I loved Peaky Blinders. Are you kidding me? So Netflix, I love Netflix. I subscribe to Netflix. But should we have been on Netflix? Yeah. Were we not because of what I'm telling you? Yeah. And so now they're in a pinch, right? And so I bring up this, to my guy who has worked with Lisa for, I think he's known her for decades. And she's apparently gone radio silent in this whole thing. And so he couldn't get a hold of her right now if he wanted to, because of all the chaos that's happening and turmoil that's happening at Netflix. But they're not buying anything right now. And they're sure as shit not buying anything that exposes how their business model is co-fangled in this madness. Because they'd be biting off the freaking, biting the hand that feeds them, so to speak, right? That's how this whole thing works. That's why we can't break through to tell the tens of millions of people who've been victimized by this thing how it works, so we, the people, can rise above to actually do what we, the citizens, are here in this society after generations before us have sacrificed blood and treasure to give us the liberties that we inherited. We have a responsibility to act and respond en masse. And there's millions of you out there who don't understand how this works. You don't understand that it was a massive setup. You don't understand it was inside pool. I mean, I got to try to give you the easiest, most robust sort of metaphor that I can think of that I think we can all relate to. Okay, I don't know. Let's just say we go down to our local grocer. Okay, so our grocer has all of the items that we want to buy and everything else, and we find out that the only way that all of those items can get on the shelves that we can purchase were made possible by the investment capital that made everything that those products have to rely on to come to market, that reality to do so. And so, that's part of what's on the shelves that we buy. But then also the store itself is on the hook for, paying its employees, doing its accounts receivables, doing, its taxes, everything else, based on its credit rating, based on its portfolio, what it can borrow, what it can loan against, what it can prove. And then in between, they make the revenue of us going there and purchasing those items. So what if we found out, for example, that, maybe 3/4 of their cantaloupes and maybe 80% of their frozen food items were poisoned, that led to a mass murder that so many people died upon, and then the person that maybe lost his best friend or his mother or somebody he cares about just couldn't let it go and went deeper and deeper and deeper to find out what the fuck happened to kill that person that was the most important person in their lives, and found out what I'm telling you, that the system that funded what it was that they purchased poisoned the cantaloupes, because in the end they were making money on your best friend or mother's death. I mean, that's a pretty close analogy to what I'm trying to talk to you about, and I think most of you can follow that. So look, it's not a mystery to me anymore. And by the way, I will say this in the final comment that he made, which is something I think about all the time, and I turned the corner on this a couple of days ago, which is, I'm done trying to get the attention of guys like Russell Brand. I watch Russell Brand a lot. I'm watching him less than I used to because, quite frankly, he's not as smart as I thought he was. He's incredible with his oratory skills. He's smart. He can kind of cut the cusp. But I've seen him over and over talk about stuff he just doesn't know about, and he just makes assumptions. That's just a joke. And so, A, he's not as credible as I thought he was. B, he's ignored me the whole time because of these cliques that exist. And it cliques in the independent media space, and unfortunately, like the Joe Rogans of the world, we should have been on, 2 years ago to tell the story. But, I was talking to this executive producer today, and he said, riddle yourself this, man. If you've got a story that's so unbelievably massive, like nothing ever before in history, and you're Joe Rogan, and you look at this, and you're looking at all the stuff that you're talking about, and you got into hot water because you're dealing with, I don't know, being pegged a racist and all of these other things, and it's been a little bit, hard at the same time. Trying to maintain your deal on Spotify because you get 100 million. Do you want to put something out there that makes everything else that you've ever done seem like minuscule in comparison? And my response was, well, if I'm Joe Rogan, because if I think that he's an honest, player in this whole racket, that not to, shouldn't use racket as the term, but I think he's an honest purveyor, really genuinely curious, and everything else. I said to him, well, yeah, of course he would. He would put us out there, but then he's like, but maybe he's not. Maybe the deal matters more, and you got to do what's easy. And yeah, controversy or not, he chose not to have Trump on. Blah blah blah. There's all of these different parameters, and so what I've just fundamentally understood, and I've understood this for some time, but I know it now more than ever. Nobody's going to help me get this to you, the masses. I got to do it myself with my team. Thank God there's people out there that do this behind the scenes, otherwise it would never get done. And they're heroes. They're these women, the angels that I talk about, that tirelessly try to get these truths to you to penetrate. Because what's going to happen next is that we're going to see a massive crisis. We're going to see a devaluation. I don't know if it's a devaluation of the dollar, but we're going to see stocks plunge. We're going to see, the economy come to a grinding halt for a short time. It might just be a recession. Maybe, like, Jamie Dimon said, it's a hurricane of some sort. What category, we don't know. I think it's going to be significant, personally. But the bottom line is nobody in power wants to tell you this story. The New York Times is doing all sorts of weird stuff these days that I don't even recognize the New York Times being what it is. And I've been an avid reader of the New York Times and a subscriber to them for well over a decade. I know the New York Times like the back of my hand, and I've seen this progression towards furthering making sure people don't know what the hell's going on. And I think that's in response to all the media that happens out there, and independent media that makes people go, what? And so there's this pushback. They still want the power, but at the same time, they're not blowing up the corruption. I mean, it's just so fucking ridiculous. The founders would never in a million years have predicted this, and neither would I growing up in the era that I did. I know that there's tens of millions of you out there that believe in liberty and justice above all else. I know that you believe in integrity. You can go to whatever church you worship. You can go to the bars. You can go hang out with strip dancers. Hey, you want to go do whatever people do that's illegal. Everybody's got different sorts of things happening in their lives, but I think there's more genuinely independent, spirited, courageous Americans that exist in this country that are the type of, let's just say, descendants of the people who created this country. I know that can be controversial given our controversial history, but there were a lot of frontiersmen. There were a lot of people with great character and ambition and vision that built this country into the superpower that it became at great sacrifice. I know the descendants of those people will not stand idly by while we get raped by a deceptive freaking con artist machine that's so easy to identify once you understand the mechanics, which is what we have presented to you at www.thecon.tv. I would love to see, thousands of you. Just give me a fucking like on YouTube, Truth Bombs the Con, Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs the Con. You don't even have to watch anything. Just like it. We got to hit these algorithms because it's up to me. And do I think I'm an important guy? Do I think I'm this guy that's going to be the savior of the United States? Do I think what I know is more important than what other people know? No. It's just that I went the distance to get the information that I'm telling you that nobody else will, so I have to. That's all there is to it. If I don't, nobody else will. And I've been on this insane journey. I mean, it goes back for me to 2011, September of 2011, when we got on the road, Eric and I, and we surfed the Occupy Wall Street movement to try to figure out what that was all about in context to what I was trying to find out, blew up the world from the 2008 great financial crisis. None of this stuff really started to come into major focus until 2010, 2012, then 2014, but then everybody kind of dropped off. I mean, in media, it was like this, it was this what's the term that I always use? Everybody took a little different piece, right? But nobody told the whole story, and that's why we had to tell the con. But when I found out what they didn't know and what they didn't tell, and this is why I said this story about Adam McKay, a couple of days ago. I mean, the guy's a genius. He's a fantastic comedic writer, and he understands power as well as anyone, but he doesn't have probably, the good fortune like I did to make this go on for years. I mean, I literally got a master's or even a PhD in criminology. That's who I am. Did I intend that? Did I? No. It was because this world forced me to do it. And so for God and family and country and everything that fucking matters that's right with the world, I decided to go the goddamn distance because that's the kind of person I am. And I hope I'm inspiring some of you guys. I don't want to shout at you. I want to keep it reasonable. I want to keep it kind of, keep it on the even keel, man. But I'm telling you, there's a lot at stake, guys. And if we don't rise to the moment, it's going to be harder. And it's going to be more painful. But I'll still be here doing what I'm doing until millions of you guys figure it out. Looks like someone's calling me. Saved by the bell.